Welcome to the New York Times Popcast, your flu game of music news and criticism. I'm John Caramanica, a critic at the New York Times.
I'm Joe Coscarelli. I'm a reporter at the New York Times.
We are live post-action Sunday night, 10:30 post Super Bowl to talk about the Kendrick halftime show. Joe, you were live blogging.
Oh yeah,
the crucial minute-to-minute coverage on nytimes.com.
Oh, yeah.
My review of the halftime show should be up shortly, if not as we speak. Kendrick Lamar headline. This is, in a lot of ways, this feels like the end of a narrative, right? Like, for the last 6 or 8 months, we've been living with Not Like Us and the shadow of Not Like Us. And here, in back-to-back weekends, the Grammys last weekend and the Super Bowl today, we have what feel like capstone achievements for hip-hop, what capstone achievements for rap beef, capstone achievements certainly for Kendrick Lamar, who has been rather gleefully dancing on Drake's purported grave for the last few months. Did you ever think, this is the real question, this is really what I opened up my piece with.
No.
I never, how was this even a subject of conversation?
Was he gonna skip it? Was there any chance he was gonna skip it?
There's no universe. I was watching people talk about the idea that he might not play Not Like Us, as if the entire reason that he was given the Super Bowl halftime show was Not Like Us.
I think the only reason he could have possibly skipped it or skipped over it quickly is what you're saying. I think Kendrick Lamar is the most celebrated rapper, maybe of all time already, halfway through his career, 12 years into his career. If he doesn't want to be known only as the Not Like Us guy, I could have seen him playing with it artfully, maybe just doing the hook, maybe doing the tease that he did do with Samuel L. Jackson, egging him on with the I'm going to play it, am I going to play it, am I going to play it? And then maybe he could have breezed past it to say, I'm more than Not Like Us. But that's not what this was.
No, I mean, obviously one of the things in pop music more broadly in the last 5 to 10 years is this notion of eras, right? And eras are sometimes tied to albums, but I think more often they're tied to philosophies. And whether Kendrick Lamar likes it or not, the last 9 months have been the era of Not Like Us. And I just couldn't envision any universe in which he doesn't take the biggest stage available to him to continue to share the message of his intense distaste for Drake, while Drake is performing in Australia or New Zealand or somewhere else. I just didn't see it. Now, are we ever going to hear Not Like Us again? I feel there's a chance we might not ever hear Not Like Us again. That's actually really, to me, the question. Is this the official end of that era? And to me, him choosing to not end the performance on Not Like Us, but to instead transition into TV Off, that to me says, okay, I'm ready to move on. We're collectively done with this guy. Like, I'm done with this guy.
Yeah.
We're done.
Yes.
I'm on to the next thing. That's how it felt to me.
I think that you're right, and I sort of hope so. I mean, even back at the Pop Out, which was in June, that felt like the grand finale of Not Like Us. Like, could he possibly have predicted that it was going to win Song and Record of the Year at the Grammys? No, I mean, that's a stretch for any rap song, let alone a rap song about pedophilia, allegedly, by Drake, a rap song that's subject of this defamation lawsuit against Universal Music. And the sort of theme of the show, the stage setup, which was a little vague and didn't really land, especially because, I don't know how the Uncle Sam, Samuel L. Jackson MC fit in, but it was a video game. Did you notice this? Like, when it started, it was like, beep, beep, boop, boop, triangle, square video game. And then there were the lights in the crowd that said game over. And Samuel L. Jackson did a couple little nods here and there where he was like, deduct one life. There was some video game through line, which didn't super land for me in terms of conceiving of the performance. But I do think you're right. Game over. Enough. Drake's going to put out sexy songs with Party Next Door on Valentine's Day. Kendrick Lamar is going to go on tour with SZA. GNX already felt like Not Like Us, the sequel. Like
Yes.
it had the energy of the song.
It was like an extended EP, like a Not Like Us themed EP in a weird way.
Right.
Sonically, at least.
Yes. And I do think at least Kendrick sort of built on the Not Like Us story a little bit with these little lines he threw in at the beginning of the song, at the beginning of the performance. You quoted in your review, they tried to rig the game, but you can't fake influence. He said, there's a cultural divide. He said, this is 40 acres and a mule. This is bigger than the music. He was sort of, I think he was trying to take it from this is about Drake being a loser and a sex abuser to, and I think this has happened slowly throughout the almost a year since Not Like Us. He's trying to say, no, it's about the purity of hip hop. It's about the purity of culture. It's about not being a faker. He's trying to basically say, I'm not mad at Drake necessarily as a person, although I hate him too, but I'm trying to tie it in with my broader project of authenticity.
But then what's fascinating to me is, and I will never forget this man's smile. I will never forget this man's smile. I mean, look, there are a number of things at play here. We can talk a little bit about how he used these kind of meta narratives about what is the responsibility of someone performing on that stage, what are their responsibilities to music, to rappers, to black artists, to black activists. But ultimately, the thing that he appeared the happiest about, the most joyful about, was
wearing skinny jeans.
But they're flared, to be fair. They're flared. They're like,
skinny jeans back. That's okay.
Yeah.
Some of us have been waiting.
I'm just, the real gallery department 2022 energy. But anyway.
Sorry, go on.
To me, that smile in that moment says that none of those bigger questions, even if he nodded to them throughout the course of the night, none of those bigger questions actually are the meaning of him being there. Like, and it's okay. I want to be very clear. I think it's okay for an artist to be selfish. I think it's okay for an artist to say, yes, I know you may impose political or social or moral narrative upon me, but actually I just kind of want to get these bars off. I want to get this sentiment off. And this is actually really connected to the larger struggle of Kendrick Lamar, which is I get this savior narrative landed on me. And I actually don't know if my shoulders are heavy enough to carry that narrative. I actually don't know that I want to carry that narrative. And so even though there are these moments in the performance where he's nodding at bigger picture things, he's nodding at, yes, I'm going to have my dancers form an American flag. That said, what's the actual meaning behind it? It didn't disrupt the flag. It didn't set the flag on fire. There's no bigger political meaning necessarily.
There's some Bloods and Crips thing that he's been playing with since To Pimp a Butterfly. Democrips and Republicans, as he said 10 years ago. But I agree, it wasn't a sharp critique necessarily.
No, it's not drawn out, and especially when we were talking about the Super Bowl halftime show 3-4 years ago, politics were squarely at the center of who said yes and who said no. And now with the influence and involvement of Jay-Z and Rock Nation, I don't want to say that that's been completely excised from the conversation, but it certainly doesn't appear to be near the center of the conversation. Though that said, I'm very surprised that there hasn't been much big picture discussion over it. They seem to have done a pretty good job of washing that away. That's been very striking. And so there were moments
past kneeling, as Jay-Z said when he took the job.
And it's funny because I imagine Kendrick envisions himself as, and is probably envisioned by many fans as an artist, perhaps most likely to push back against those strictures. And it seemed to me like the Samuel L. Jackson through line was meant to be the chorus of saying, but Kendrick, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you playing it this way? Why aren't you being more political? Why aren't you being less focused on your own vendettas? That to me is why Sam Jackson was there. And I guess from a cleverness perspective, it was a smart way of weaving in this anticipated critique into a performance.
Very notably, no all right B-side, not even a sharper version of all right, something like Blacker the Berry, which you could imagine him, which he's done in the past on big stages. The Heart series, none of his most cutting, deep sort of cultural, political stuff in there. Now I wonder, like, does All Right play in this political climate, or is it too glib? Is it too optimistic? He seems to be in a more personal place, but also in a darker place. And I think that probably matches the mood of the country. It would have been weird, I think, if there would have been the optimism of All Right. I don't know. Did you expect to hear it in this set?
So I'm going to be honest, I absolutely expected to hear All Right. And I expected to hear All Right as a counterpoint to Not Like Us. I didn't know if I expected to hear Not Like Us early, giving way to All Right, or All Right somewhere in the middle and then kind of hard juxtapose against Not Like Us. And in a way, the two SZA collaborations sat maybe where I expected All Right to sit in this particular arrangement of songs, which is to say, this kind of bolt of, to your point, optimism, a kind of implicit political statement that looks beyond some kind of trauma into a more hopeful future. You know, this is a Super Bowl that's being attended by President Donald Trump, and we've had an incredibly busy last 2 or 3 weeks of the new administration. You would think that it's possible that Kendrick might want to find a way to implicitly comment upon that on this very big stage. But ultimately, and I know I said this earlier, like, this is the biggest stage available to Kendrick to finish off this beef. And I won't be surprised if we never hear Not Like Us again, whereas I do think we'll hear All Right for years to come.
Yeah, and instead of making that statement that he could have made in that moment of the set list, they chose to advertise their tour. And Kendrick chose to say, I was a hit maker before Not Like Us. They just sounded slightly different. Playing All the Stars with SZA from Black Panther. You know, he did Humble, obviously one of his most known songs, his first solo #1 before Not Like Us. And you know, I thought this was an interesting slice of Kendrick, but I do wonder, strictly as TV, strictly as Super Bowl performance, if you're not clued in to the Drake narrative, if you're not following along for when is he going to play Not Like Us, how does this performance work? Is it like the song hit, Not Like Us? I feel like whether you knew the narrative or not, the song landed because that beat is huge.
Sure.
He obviously was giddy rapping it, the smile, the dancing, the shuffling, you know, that worked. Everything before it, like
very
if
insular.
You're not
Very
anticipating
insular.
Not Like Us. Does that work? I
Yeah,
don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, I was really struck by how, you know, we always talk about how much of an interior rapper Kendrick is, and how even his kind of like biggest quote unquote songs, his broadest songs, still can have like this bit of claustrophobia around them. And I was absolutely struck by how small and almost like rapping inward a lot of this set was. That's in part because of some of his song selection. Like, he didn't choose every single big hit of his. He deliberately, I mean, maybe half the set is from GNX, which only came out 3 months ago. So there's that. But also you want to talk about Kendrick doing this for sport. This is Kendrick saying, I'm going to come to this huge stage and I'm basically going to rap like I'm not super famous. Like I'm a rapping ass rapper. That's what I do. That's his version of sport. And he wants to say, hey, actually, I made it this far. I got here by doing this. I didn't get here with melody. I didn't get here with songs that trouble the line between hip hop and R&B. Like all of the things that we love about Drake, all the things that Drake has been so effective at in his own career and so influential at in terms of shaping how other genres and other artists sound. Kendrick saying, that's not me. Kendrick saying, I'm a rapper in the mold of early 2010s to mid 2010s LA rappers, in the mold of mid to late 90s LA and New York rappers. Like, I care
Blog
about
rappers.
bars. Yeah, real. You know, I saw there was a tweet going around tonight that was like, "Can you believe a blog era rapper is headlining Super Bowl?" I mean, this is someone who cares about bars. This is someone who cares about the ethics that Kendrick truly cares about, at least publicly. I can't speak to what he cares about in his private life or in his personal politics, but what he cares about publicly and what the undercarriage of the Drake beef is what is the direction of hip hop going to be, right? Is it going to be this sort of hybridized thing that takes it away from like pure rapping? Or is it going to be something that's truer to the clinical and classical expression of the art form. Now, I'm of the mindset that the way that Drake raps, whether it's melodic or not or whatever, like Drake is a very good rapper. I always find it a little
And
tiresome.
I think Kendrick would say that.
I agree. I always find it tiresome when people are like, well, there's one real rapper in this beef. And it's like, actually, no. And I actually think if you listen to Drake's rap, the funny thing about the beef is that Kendrick's breakout in the beef is when he does his most Drake-like thing. And Drake's most powerful stuff in the beef is in doing his most Kendrick-like thing. What that tells me is they're both flexible enough to do either of the styles on top of many other styles, but for how they carry their careers normally, they've both chosen lanes. And Kendrick wants to use the Super Bowl stage to say, yes, I'm going to be on the hood of the GNX and I'm going to rap, head down into the microphone. I'm going to open up with a snippet of a song that's not even out.
Yeah, he rapped a snippet at the Super Bowl. That's the most like blog rapper, I'm doing this for my real fans thing you could possibly do. He opened with a song that was in the commercial, the YouTube video for GNX. Fans call it Tiramisu or Bodies or whatever, but it's not out. People have been begging for it, but he literally rapped a snippet first. Like, that is a crazy thing to do on that stage, but I gotta say, it didn't land for me because I'd already heard it. I want to talk about the leak. So he plays this unreleased song, which I think might have been a shocking moment for many Kendrick Lamar fans. But I think if you're the level of Kendrick Lamar fan that knows that song, you're also the level of Kendrick Lamar fan that knows Kendrick Lamar's entire Super Bowl set list leaked online days ahead of the show. And not only the songs he would play, but a recording, seemingly a rehearsal recording. A track for dancers or musicians to play to was available in full online, 13 minutes long, with basically this entire set as it was performed on TV, minus Samuel L. Jackson and Serena Williams, who we have not yet mentioned, but who did crip walk on stage.
And I want just as a sidebar about that, when I saw that, my initial thing was, I can't believe they found someone who looks so much like Serena Williams to do this. Like, what a savage burn that was. How
and
incredible.
They put her in a blue tennis skirt.
Unbelievable. And then you texted me, and then I looked on Twitter, and I was mind blown. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most of the 100 million plus people who watch the Super Bowl don't trawl message boards for leaks ahead of time. But in a war that included many leaks back and forth between Drake and Kendrick and The Weeknd and Future, etc., I thought it was pretty striking that we knew what was going to happen.
Did this strike you as a side choosing leak, or is it just that leaks are now so pervasive that anything that can be leaked will be leaked?
Well, the place it got most of its burn, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, was via academics. So that's DJ Academics on his Twitter account. It was quickly copyright striked by Interscope, so it was pulled down, but it persisted, on message boards and stuff. So, I don't know where this came from. Who cares? But I do think it's notable that something of this scale, like this big moment, was available online if you knew where to look.
To me, it was more shocking that this is the first year that we've ever had a leak of this. I mean, you think about the number of people that have to be involved with the production and planning of a Super Bowl halftime show, whether it's musicians and dancers, whether it's management teams, lawyers, we're talking literally hundreds, if not thousands of people have access to some version of this or can sneak a camera in somewhere. I think what actually struck me more is that we haven't seen this in previous years. So and
there have been purported leaks, but mostly I think they've turned out to be false, whereas this one was 95% accurate, 90% accurate to what was performed on stage.
If I recall correctly, there was sort of an overlayer of this is for the NFL or something like that, a kind of what do you call that? A stamp?
Yeah, there was a voice, there was an audio, there was it seemed real. We'll say that, and it turned out it was.
Do you think that? So, what function do you think that leak played, if any, in terms of how this show was received tonight?
I mean, probably negligible, again, except among the super fans. Joe Budden, who's been probably the primary voice of commentary throughout this entire beef, was basically if this is real, this is a really bad set. And I wonder, I don't know. Like, there was some anticlimax for the people paying the closest amount of attention. But other than that, there's some real insider internet nerd stuff. But so much of this beef was insider internet nerd
That's the
stuff.
thing, and it's important to remember that Kendrick's fans, like Kendrick fans, are absolutely in that lane, but so are Drake fans. I mean, and the big picture is like, so are all fans. Like, we hear from them constantly. I mean, this could have been like Jenny from Blackpink, there could have been this degree of fervor intensity for almost any major pop act or hip hop act or country act, even from the last 10, whose fandoms have developed like in the last 10 years. So I guess I was less quote unquote shocked by it than you. I wasn't totally surprised. For me, what I was mostly wondering was it an attempt at subversion? Was it a way, if it was, let's say it came somehow trickle down through Drake's camp, what was Drake's camp hoping to achieve other than just salting the game a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically it.
Like we see,
yeah, or in football terms, trying to get them to call a last minute audible by screwing up the delivery, especially of Not Like Us. But I think enough conspiracy rabbit hole for us. Like, we could go on forever. But I am curious. Like, okay, the Rock Nation era, J-Lo and Shakira. Dr. Dre, Snoop with Eminem and Kendrick, etc. Rihanna, Usher last year. Where does this stack up in modern times? Like, did this land for you in a way that,
in terms of quality
some
of performance?
Yeah, and in terms of how it will be remembered.
I think of everything you just named in terms of how they're going to be remembered or the degree to which they're going to be remembered. I think it's this performance and the Dr. Dre et al. Performance. To me, they're the most surprising, and they're surprising in the kind of like larger narrative sense, right? Like what Kendrick did on that stage, even if there are sort of issues with, damn, it's a little bit more low key than the average Super Bowl halftime show. There are these things that maybe don't exactly work at this scale. It's important to think of the scale of this performance. There are maybe things that don't exactly work at this scale, but the element of surprise in terms of a rapper of this style performing at this scale, number one, but also on top of that, a rapper who is not necessarily known for big expressions of positive emotion coming to the stage and be almost with this like relief of victory on his face. Like, it was almost as if no one in those 10 or 12 minutes, absolutely no one can touch him. He absolutely was at the pinnacle. That said, there could be a way to disturb that narrative, and there was one way to disturb that narrative, which is towards the very end of the set. I think it was maybe in the transition from Not Like Us into TV Off. Yes. One of the, I don't know if it was a background dancer or a crew member.
Some sort of extra.
Yeah. Pulled out a sort of stitched together flag of Sudan and Palestine. And that was just marked with like messages of solidarity, and waved it. And in that moment, I didn't catch it live, but we saw images of it, and then eventually saw a full video of it floating around on X. You're thinking, well, okay, the sort of optics of this performance are kind of like a roots level activism, even if the activism is largely aimed at another rapper. It's like a roots level activism. And what an interesting optical choice to have someone sort of display grassroots activism in the context of this very, very big and corporate performance. No matter what we think of the kind of rebellion embodied in Kendrick or anyone performing at the Super Bowl, it's fundamentally a corporate performance. Let's not pretend that it's not. So to kind of weave in the optics of grassroots activism, you think, oh, what a novel, challenging, and perhaps risky decision. However, of course, it turns out that it was novel and risky for just one person, who was the person who pulled out that flag, who was chased off the stage and ultimately tackled by a bunch of security guards in suits, who did not appear interested in the optics of revolution.
I did think it was particularly striking that he was standing on the hood of the black Buick GNX that Kendrick began his performance on, and that stands in, for the album cover of GNX. It's like, this is the symbol of this era, as you said, of Kendrick. And here is, a guerrilla, essentially, an interloper, protester, who is going to make the statement, the plain statement of solidarity for Gaza and Sudan that I think people at their most base want out of Kendrick Lamar. I think this is, a very striking symbol of someone, a guerrilla protester, basically giving the people what I think some have wanted for many, many years from Kendrick, but that he has refused to give them. Plainly, a straightforward, modern day, current events relevant protest, essentially.
Yeah.
And Kendrick doesn't work in those sorts of simple messages and
He works
images.
he works in allegory.
Always,
No, he works in allegory, and
yes.
also so many of the kind of political meaning, like social meaning, that people derive from Kendrick and Kendrick's songs are often, I find, extracted from personal narrative that are in his songs. And what Kendrick is very good at, whether you enjoy Kendrick music or not, whether you think he's sort of where he sits in the power rankings in your mind, what Kendrick is quite good at is introspection and telling personal stories that take on the weight of global social issues. Now, I don't always think that the opinions ascribed to him by listeners or by the most kind of like urgent minded of his listeners are exactly what he's offering. I think what he's essentially saying is, I'm a person who struggles with this. I am perceived this way, but I am not always this way. I am a person who has made mistakes in my life. I am a person who lives with the moral complications and ethical complications, and I do not wish to be a beacon of purity for anyone. But that said, you're correct that people have been wanting plain spoken statements of solidarity from him. And so it's notable that a person who was part of this crew took the opportunity to say, and especially I assume if they were part of all the rehearsals, understood exactly what the outer boundaries of Kendrick's performance were going to be, and said, you know what? I've got a story to tell that's just outside these boundaries, and what bigger platform than this?
Yeah, and we got statements from Rock Nation and the NFL who both said, this person was part of this performance, but this was not part of any rehearsal. We don't claim this, essentially. And so, we're left with, especially in the Jay-Z Rock Nation era of the halftime show, Eminem kneeling on stage in, apparent solidarity with Colin Kaepernick remains the big moment of politics. Even after someone like Rihanna, who refused the halftime show in the past in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick and then takes it on once it becomes a Rock Nation thing, she wasn't interested in that.
Right.
And neither was Kendrick Lamar. But I think there's something to be said for Kendrick sort of bringing that out of people, even if it's not on purpose.
And do you think, and maybe this is like a little bit 4D chess of me, but do you think there's any universe in which that gentleman was actually planted by Kendrick and sort of like as a sacrificial lamb, and just say, hey man, you're gonna have to go sit down, you might get arrested, like who knows, but that is the way that we collectively are going to sneak protest into this extremely non-protest event?
John, I'll see you on the Kendrick Reddit tomorrow, where you can
Offer
be
that
among
theory.
all of the people who are working with that theory. But I highly, highly doubt we will see even a flicker of him, claiming or even co-signing this moment. It's just not what he does. He floats above it, and I think he will continue to float above it, especially now that hopefully he's done with Drake.
Forgive me for being giga-brained. It's late, and the norovirus is working its way out of my system. That's our show. Thank you to Brooke Minter, Sophie Erickson, and Sawyer Roque handling video tonight, and Pedro Rosado picking up audio in the morning. Every episode of Popcast ever is at nytimes.com/popcast. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/popcast, on IG and TikTok at Popcast Deluxe. We'll be back next week.